What up, people? Adam Wallace getting ready to head into the gym and do cardio. So, in our team meeting for the office yesterday, I was introduced to a guy named Andy Andrews in a video that was shown. And it always surprises me where I find people that really influence my thinking or have something to teach me, which everyone that you meet or that you come across has something that you can learn. So, in the team meeting, this Andy Andrews is talking about how everything that you do matters, no matter how large or small you think it is, that every action or inaction that you take, it matters. And ultimately, the larger picture, the outcome, is a result of those things that you do or do not. Now, and he gives an example of how he proves it. Joshua Chamberlain was a teacher that, when he joined the Union Army, became a colonel. At Gettysburg, he was placed 3/4 of the way up a mountain on the flank of the Union Army and was told to hold that point, that if he didn't hold that point, that the South would break through, would flank the Union Army at Gettysburg, and would win that battle, which ultimately would have won the whole war. So Chamberlain then stands behind a wall that they made, which was maybe knee-high or waist-high. It wasn't very large. With at the beginning of Gettysburg, he had 300 men. After 3 charges, he was left with 80 men. And the South then starts charging for a 4th time. The 80 men, out of ammo, had already ravaged the dead bodies around them for all the ammo that they could find. They then put their bayonets on their guns, and Chamberlain orders them to charge. He jumps over the wall before his men can even object to it, and they charge 80 men at 400 Southern soldiers. They take the Southern soldiers captive with no ammo and just bayonets on their rifles. And they then, when the South loses the war at Gettysburg, or the battle at Gettysburg, and ultimately that's what causes the beginning of the South to lose the war. So historians say, had Chamberlain not charged over the wall, protected the flank, and taken those 400 soldiers captive, that the United States would not be just the North and South, because the South would have won. It would be 9 to 13 different countries. It would look a lot like Europe. So, and the result of that would be that in the 1940s, when Hitler started invading the rest of Europe, that the United States would not have existed to stand in the breach and to stop that invasion from occurring. And that when Hirohito started invading the Pacific Islands, that there would have been no United States at all to stop that as well. There wouldn't have been a country big enough, strong enough, and wealthy enough to fight on 2 fronts and win that war. So, and that's all a direct result of the decision that Chamberlain made to jump over the wall and charge into 400 soldiers with no ammunition, which it worked. So, and another result, or another example that Andy Andrews gives of everything that you matters, or everything that you do matters, is that Norman Borlaug was credited with hybridizing wheat and corn, and which in turn saved 2 billion plus people on our planet, because it gave food to people in arid climates. And the result of that, though, is that it wasn't Norman Borlaug that should have won that. Andy Anderson says that it should have been Henry Wallace. Now, Henry Wallace was the vice president to Roosevelt. He was his first vice president. But before that, he was the Secretary of Agriculture. And Henry Wallace started a station in Mexico that was all about the hybridization of corn and wheat. And he employed Norman Borlaug at that station. And Norman Borlaug's the one who ultimately found the way to hybridize corn and wheat, which was then accredited with the saving of the 2 billion plus people on the planet. Yet he wouldn't have learned that had it not been for Henry Wallace, who initiated the station and then taught Norman Borlaug everything he learned there. And then Henry Wallace would have never become the Secretary of Agriculture had it not been for George Washington Carver, who, while he was at the Iowa State University, had a professor that had a 6-year-old son that when they, on Saturdays and Sundays, George Washington Carver would go out, and that 6-year-old would go with him, and he instilled the love of plants, and that 6-year-old was Henry Wallace. And George Washington Carver instilled the love of plants in Henry Wallace, who then in turn became the Secretary of Agriculture, who became the Vice President, who started the station for the hybridization of corn and wheat, and then employed Norman Borlaug. But then he goes even further to say that George Washington Carver wouldn't have been around had it not been for Moses, who was a farmer out of Diamond, Missouri, I think he says it is. Let me look that up real quick. Out of Diamond, Missouri. And it was Moses and Susan who were in the South and didn't believe in slavery at the time. So so they raised a lot of animosity from like the Quantrill writers. And there was a George Washington Carver's mother was friends with Susan, and the Quantrill riders came through, burned buildings, shot people, and then grabbed George Washington Carver's mother while she was holding him and dragged her off. And Moses then, after several attempts, was able to set up a meeting with the Quantrill riders, and then went and gave them his last horse and took that baby back from them, or they gave it back to him, and the baby was almost dead. And he then at that point said that he would raise the baby as his own and educate and teach that baby, knowing that his mother was dead. And that baby was George Washington, and he gave him the last name Carver, which was their name. So George Washington Carver was then raised by Moses and Susan Carver, who then in turn took this 6-year-old out and instilled the love of plants in him. And then that 6-year-old, who was Henry Wallace, then becomes, and you see where it's going, so you can go even further back than that. So every single thing that you do matters. And this video got a little long, but that was the story, and Andy Andrews tells it much better than I do, and it is actually pretty awesome to listen to. So it just ultimately hits home the fact that everything that you do matters. No matter what it is that you think the outcome is, if it's something small or large, but every single thing that you do matters, and everyone matters. So I'm going to go in here and get my cardio done, and I will catch you all later. Have an awesome Wednesday.